Everyone, happy Thursday. I thought this week for a little bit of content in our quarantine corner, instead of just writing something, I thought I'd come to you and prove to you that we are actually still here, um, still doing our thing here in Red Wing. I don't know about you, but it has been definitely a challenging time looking for ways to just engage with our family and also engage with God. I wanted to just share something with you that I've just been thinking about a little bit the last couple of days. First of all, I think I put a link a little while back, a couple of weeks ago, to the Covenant Home Altar. You can find that online. But I was reading through this, and on Tuesday there was a passage that brought us to John chapter 20. And it's talking about Jesus following his resurrection and his meeting of his disciples. And it takes us to John chapter 20, verses 19 to 23. And this is the story. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them, and he said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father sent me, I am sending you." And with that, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of anyone, their sins are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven." So Jesus comes and he stands among them, and his message is forgive. Forgive, which is an interesting thing given what he has just experienced, what they as disciples, as followers, have just experienced. His message is forgive. It's a pretty radical circumstance for him to just come walk through the door and show up in their midst, but then a pretty radical message: forgive. In the midst of all that you have experienced, he's inviting them to write a different story. And I was thinking about that this week. On Facebook, I saw an entry that somebody had posted about a woman who had her credit card taken at a Starbucks, and the person at the Starbucks took that credit card behind, took it to the back room apparently, and I don't know, wrote down the number or something, and eventually used that to buy some groceries at a local grocery store. Well, the woman whose credit card had been taken, she bought whatever she was buying, had it handed back to her, and later that day, there was the bank called her and said that there had been a charge of $212 that had been posted for that day, which obviously she hadn't used. And so when they traced it back, they found out it was this worker at Starbucks that had used this credit card. Well, what ensued was this woman deciding that she would make an example out of this young girl, and found out when the girl was working at Starbucks, went back to the drive-thru, and while somebody else videotaped this, she read this girl the riot act. Eventually, I think, called the police, and this girl didn't deny using the credit card, but you just wondered what the story was there. And I read some of these comments online that were responding or reacting to this story of this woman taking out this vengeance, so to speak, against this young girl. And a lot of the comments were all about, yeah, she should get hers. Yeah, she should have known better. The retribution was very, very evident in all of these comments. And I found myself wondering, in the midst of that, as a follower of Christ, what is a better ending to that story? And if every one of us could have had an opportunity to write an ending to that story, what would it look like? What would the better ending to that story look like? And in view of this particular story of Jesus here in John chapter 20, where he comes and stands among them and says, forgive, essentially, forgive others, especially given what they have experienced, especially what Jesus has experienced, what would be a better ending for that story about this woman confronting the woman at Starbucks? And then for us, how could we write better endings to our stories? In fact, what new story might we and could we or could we write in our particular circumstance? So just something to consider as you go through your day. What new story, what better story could you be writing today in your relationships with your family, in your relationships with those on social media, in view of the story that Christ has written on our behalf? What new story might we write? Might we consider in this very unprecedented time? Just food for thought and something to consider, maybe around the dinner table or over a cup of coffee with those that you are hunkering down with. So, all for now. We'll see you again next time we talk.